I want to now pass it to Thomas to talk a bit about ethics. I'm curious what ethic you think we need to bring forward, to bring this cultural shift forward, and how we relate with our watersheds and the communities they support. What can we learn from water?
Yeah, no, that's I guess one of the questions, right? How do we think about things differently? And maybe I start with piggybacking off what you said, Forrest, right? Seeing the world differently, and as you said, right, that doesn't mean that we need to reinvent something radically new. I mean, you just need to think about the fact, right, that like a lot of the indigenous cultures that are still here lived in various places for tens of thousands of years without destroying them. Kind of your descendant culture has maybe been around in its current form for 300 or 400 years, and I think Europeans and Euro-descendant kind of, or Euro-dominant cultures think of themselves as powerful. But think about it maybe like an individual organism, right? If you take cocaine, you can do a lot of things for a short amount of time. Right? And I don't speak from experience, by the way, I should point that out here. But it won't last, right? I mean, I think eventually, the body keeps the score, right, as the saying goes, and it will be like, okay, I think that's it, right? I think here's the wall. And I think we can think about that also, right, for like the natural systems that we are, and by we I mainly mean kind of, Euro-descendant peoples are kind of extracting at a rapid pace, right? That I think this power that kind of the European cultures that then colonized the world in the last 200 years seem to have, I think is a bit of a mirage, right? I think it really can't last, right? I think you talked about a cataclysm, and I think it has to change. And I think it's important that we see that clearly, right, that it has to change, and that also means we have to face what that means in terms of who will lose something and how we transition justly, right, how we keep, I think, for example, Carl White, who is a Potawatomi environmental ethicist, he has pointed out that, for example, with renewable energies, there's the same people that already suffered in the old system, right, like poor people, working class people, indigenous people, the global south, they are bearing the brunt now of this clean energy transition again, right? And that really, to me, all indicates, right, maybe going back to your question, that, right, the change we need is profound, right? It can't just be cosmetics. It can't just be we keep doing the same, kind of like hierarchical kind of colonial thing, but now we do it with solar, right? I think that's not right, like nuclear power. I mean, nuclear bombs that are solar powered, right, are still nuclear bombs, right? That's not. So I think the change has to be radical, but it can be very good too, right? A lot of thinkers have pointed this out, right? Like Naomi Klein, like Jenny Odell, a lot of others, right? That this is also a chance to build a better world, right? And I think if we want people to buy into it, it has to be just, right? I think when people say, right, like, well, I mean, if we shut down this coal-fired power plant, right, like how am I going to feed my family? We have to have an answer for that, right? We can't just say, well, it needs to be done. I mean, it needs to be done, yes, but we have to have an answer for that if we want to keep or maintain or actually enhance our democracy and get everyone on board. In terms of, right, like the ethics of it, I think one thing maybe we could think about, right, we need to be radically inclusive, right? And that means, well, who is excluded, right? Like a lot of like various human groups are excluded, future generations are excluded, right? They're not considered at all in our institutions in the way we think, but also non-humans are excluded as well, right? I don't know how many people have, read some of Ed Young's work on animal perception, right? But he talks a lot about if we shifted a lot of our lights to red lights, that would really help a lot of insects and thereby birds and thereby, like reptiles and amphibians. But we kind of don't think about non-humans, right? Most of the time we just kind of, we just live our lives and we just kind of let the non-human world deal with the consequences. But to maybe say a few concrete things, right? I think if you think about, right, what is required ethically. So the first thing I think is that I completely agree, I think, with what you said and what others said, right, that we need a cultural change. It's important maybe to distinguish when you talk about ethics that it is not simply about individual change, right? I think individuals are important, but we need to talk about the structures that actually incentivize kind of bad behavior, right? I think we need to build a society where what is good and what is enjoyable can be aligned with what is right. And currently that's very hard, right? I mean, I assume everyone in this room has tried to live more ethically and more righteously in their own ways, and every single time it's hard, right? It's hard culturally because usually you're kind of one of very few people. It's hard structurally because it means, you know, you bike to work and you're putting your life in danger and you're all sweaty when you get there, right? But that isn't necessarily the case, right? There are places where you could bike to work and maybe there's a shower at work and maybe people don't try to kill you as you go there, or there's like a separate bike path, right? So first structures have to change so that people can actually be good, right? Because I think most people want to be good. I think most people want to do the right thing, but they also don't want to be miserable all the time. And I think we need to build a system that can do that. So there's the structure level, and maybe just kind of on the, I guess, more properly ethical level, I think we need to look outward, right? We need to kind of value things differently. For example, when it comes to water systems, we need to just really value the integrity of water systems. Right? This needs to be something that we, instead of just worrying about GDP or things like that, right? We need to, for example, this I get from Lynn and Fouwer, a Dutch activist and author, where she says that, for example, a measure of wealth, and this aligns very well with indigenous, I think, ideas, would be drinkable rivers, for example. But that's usually not even discussed as an indicator of wealth, right? It's like, you know, the stock market or something, but who really cares about the stock market? I mean, like, I know they all pushed us, right, to have like pension funds that are linked to the stock market, but, you know, I think 95% of the stock market is really only interesting to about 1,000 people who are all billionaires. But yeah, not to digress too much. So we need to be outward looking, we need to be inward looking, we need to cultivate like virtues that actually enable us, habituate us to do the right thing, and that I think involves humility and respect, right, for humans and non-humans. It also means, for example, that we can learn from water, right? Water is not just an inanimate thing, or it's its own agent, which means we can learn, for example, that everything is related, right? What somebody does upstream that will affect people downstream. It will go into the air, it will come down again, and this idea that we all separated, like water, kind of belies that and says, no, like look at me, I'm telling you, we're all connected. We can also look at water and realize that we're not fully in control, because even with our best engineering, water sometimes just doesn't do what we want it to do. And that's important to realize and important to accept, I guess, in terms of who we are. And then maybe finally, I think we need to look at how we relate to each other, and that needs to include fairness or justice, right? And again, that goes back, justice for future generations, justice for other humans, justice for non-humans as well. So that was maybe quite long-winded, but yeah, it's a big question.
Yeah, no, it was great. You made us laugh, so kept us entertained.